And I have to apologize to you because I omitted something in my introduction. You are also the founder of the Palestinian Chronicle and Newly I are two prominent news outlets on the internet. So you've given us a lot of food for thought. You talked about Palestinians taking on responsibility, having to do soul searching, having to do their homework. We, as parts of the Palestinian cause, we know what we can do, and I hope we do it. But can you elaborate a little more about this soul searching, this Palestinian homework, this taking over in concrete terms?
Can you hear me okay? Okay. So, if you look at the previous uprising, the Intifada in Palestine, the one that is most notable is the 1987 Intifada, where the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem and Palestinians in 48 rose against injustice in this kind of collective chant and collective movement. Now, a lot of people don't understand that when we say Intifada, we are not talking about an uprising or a revolution for the liberation of Palestine. As people who really don't really understand the history, the people history of Palestine, the history of collective movements in Palestine. If we look back at history, we will find that every time Palestinians rose as a collective, they rose with very clear intentions of reclaiming the power, the access to the narrative, reclaiming the collective identity of a nation. That's exactly what we need to do. We need to do what we did during the first Intifada, the second Intifada, previous uprisings, previous upheavals. The Palestinian people would need to define who they are past the confines of politics, Oslo, Area A and B and C, the factional confines that has replaced the Palestinian flag with factional flags, the limited references to history, the fact that the Palestinian refugees became almost a symbolic part of the discussion is not the core of the discussion anymore. We need to find that once more we need to explore what we once called al-Thawabit al-Palestinian, the Palestinian constants. And these constants, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, the territorial integrity of Palestine, and so much more, justice for the Palestinian people everywhere, from Gaza to Kuwait to Lebanon to Syria. These are the constants that unified us as a nation. Oslo deprived us from that. And now we are talking about entirely different sets of historical and political references. We need to challenge that. The only ones who, in my opinion, are capable of challenging that is the Palestinian people. And only when they are good and ready, they will let us know when that moment comes. I hear, just because I've done a lot of research on popular movements in Palestine and the previous uprisings, I think it's kind of quite, I don't want to say funny, maybe that's not the right term, but to hear people say Palestinians need to do a third Intifada, as if it's really a political decision that the people as a collective, all millions of them, get together and say, let's do an Intifada. It doesn't work that way. But there is that movement. We are inching closer to that rise of a new political consciousness in Palestine. That's once more challenging the walls, the checkpoints, the factional divides. Who's a Palestinian Israeli, who's a Jordanian, whatever, who's a West Banker, who's Gazan. We are seeing this new spirit. Once that new spirit is crystallized, that's the moment we truly need to start doing our homework and defining rather, our Palestinian priorities.
Maybe I can ask just one more question, and then you can ask some questions. When I've been in Palestine 2.5 years ago, or I think it was in February 2013, and I noticed a great nostalgia to the first Intifada, not to the second, but the first, because they're totally different. I think you may agree with that. But they couldn't get around it anymore because things have changed so much on the ground. You can't leave that out of the equation, I think.
But it happened that I also was living in Palestine during the first Intifada, and I was living in a refugee camp called Nusayrat. It's the largest in size and the second largest in population. I'm not going to take credit, I'm not going to give our refugee camp the credit of starting the Intifada. I would be lying. It's the Jabalia refugee camp that started the Intifada in Gaza. It was 4 Palestinian laborers who were ran over intentionally by an Israeli truck driver. But I will give Nusayrat the credit that we were the first to rise in solidarity with that refugee camp. And then Bureij, Maghazi, Khan Yunis, Gaza, the West Bank, then the entirety of Palestine was on fire. The dynamics of how we got there was the most organic, popular experience you can ever imagine. It was completely unwritten, unexpected. But what's really interesting about it is that if you read the literature and the media, you know, the articles and Arabic media and Al-Quds and other newspapers, you would find that that was a time of despair. Prior to the Intifada, it was actually a time of despair. I remember reading something that Mahmoud Darwish wrote at the time when he said something to the effect of, "You have saved us from our defeat." Mahmoud Darwish was with the Tunisia crowd after the end of the Lebanon war. The Palestinian leadership, the PLO, was scattered all over the Middle East. The leadership was in Tunisia. So that national project that was situated in Lebanon completely fell apart. So who is going to rise? Those poor people in Gaza and the refugee camps? Of course not. Because, you know, there hasn't been that legacy. The moment everybody discounted, in fact, if you remember, during that time, there was all sorts of efforts to co-opt the Palestinian leadership because they knew that they are completely defeated. They are ready to surrender, sign an initial, it's all over. And who rose? The refugee camps of Gaza. The most supposedly economically disadvantaged, politically disempowered, isolated, poor, starved, besieged groups of people. They were the ones to rise and give the Palestinian national project everywhere in the world a new momentum. So, if you compare that situation to where we are right now, I would say, I'll say, you know what, granted, there is that same level of despair. Maybe there's that level of, we are that weakened, indeed, but somehow the Palestinian people managed somehow to stand on their own feet and to define new priorities. And they will. It's a matter of time. The question is, are we going to be, as international solidarity movements, are we going to be ready to stand there and to help them in that process?
Anybody has a question? No? De vragen kunnen ook in het Nederlands worden gesteld. Moet ik even lezen. Ja? De microfoon komt naar je toe, Bert.
Yes, my name is Egbert Harmsen. Thank you very much for your very lively account of what's happening to the Palestinians and the projects which you are working on, and which you say the Palestinians need to work on the project of a transcending national identity, transcending geographic, political, religious divides, you name it. Could you tell us a little bit more on how this project, how you envisage that also in terms of action, in terms of a strategy? How should it be translated into a strategy of action? Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we've made as Palestinians, I hope I'm not being too critical of Palestinians here. Being a Palestinian, I give myself a lot more room to be critical, but I think one of the biggest mistakes that we made is that with time there was this level of detachment between our intellectual and the people on the ground, between our politicians and our leadership and the people who are living the everyday hurt and pain and struggle and suffering. I think one thing we need to do is we need to reconcile all of this. I think the generation of the intellectual generation that rose after Oslo and applauded Oslo and hoped that peace somehow, in some magical sort of way, is going to find its way to Palestine, Israel. I think that generation is no longer in charge of the Palestinian narrative anymore. I think they are negligible and they are marginal. I think there's a new awareness that is going on in Palestine, and I think Gaza played a very important role in it. For a while, the word muqawama, which means resistance from Arabic, kind of almost became almost like a joke, you know? Like, in fact, Mahmoud Abbas called it al-muqawama al-abathiyya, kind of nonsensical, see? And Gaza somehow kind of not only challenged that narrative, it defeated it. Again, I'm not talking weapons, I'm not talking rockets. I am talking the very idea that as people we refuse to be defeated. This is an incredible notion to be fostered under the harshest of circumstances and for Gaza to be able to withstand. Now, we know the numbers. We know how many people were killed in the last war, in the previous war, and how many houses and schools. But what we don't talk about is how did that intellectually affected Palestinians? How did the Palestinian narrative itself somehow was influenced by that new momentum? How the word muqawama, resistance, is once more making its way, seeping back into the overall Palestinian discourse. And I think this is profound. Now, our challenge is we need to reconcile between the world and realm of ideas and, on the other hand, what is happening within Palestinian society on the street. We can't grow detached anymore. We can't speak about Palestine from a distance, from universities in Cambridge and Chicago and wherever. Palestine is in Palestine. And the Palestinian people, regardless of where they are in the world, they will always identify with that geographic piece of land that's named Palestine. So we need to take the narrative back where it belongs. And we need to go to the people. And we need the initiative to come from Palestine itself. This is why the BDS movement is particularly refreshing in that sense, because the call for boycott does not come from Paris, does not come from New York, it does not come from Moscow. It comes from the West Bank and Gaza. See, that was an incredibly important initiative, and this is why it garnered this much attention. And because it gave us credibility, it empowered us as a community. It is these kind of initiatives that we now need. We need to walk away from Oslo altogether. I don't care whether, you say Oslo is dead, but in reality, area A and B and C is still there. It doesn't matter. This is the matter of time before that whole notion, that whole bubble of Oslo, in Ramallah, in Muqata'a, before it's all gone and done with. But what we really need right now is we are going through a transition in Palestine. The post-Gaza transition, the post-Oslo transition. History can be annoyingly slow. And within this transition, that's where the discussion should be espoused. And it's happening. We are talking in Gaza, we are talking in Birzeit University, in Najah University, in Hebron University, in Jerusalem University. Our intellectuals, our students, our people, we are talking and we are having a dialogue. I don't know when will the outcome. My hope is that the outcome of this dialogue is that we walk away completely from the past. We cut away with Oslo and the Oslo culture and the VIP cards and that privileged elitist groups of people who are living in these tiny little islands in the West Bank, benefiting as Palestinians are suffering. We want to walk away from all of them. And we need to find yet a new path to articulate new ideas. It's going to take time for that to happen. But I see the momentum underway. If you remember a while back, there was an Israeli plan to dispossess tens of thousands of Palestinian Bedouins from the Nakba. And do you guys remember how the reaction, Palestinians everywhere, in Gaza, they came out in the tens of thousands, in the West Bank, in Palestine 48, in today's Israel, even in Lebanon and the refugee camps, the Bedouins who have actually been kind of almost existed on the margins of Palestinian political discourse were a unifying force. When the Palestinian parties united in Israel in this last elections, regardless of the political wisdom of running in the Knesset. If it's, that's not the point. But the fact that when Palestinians united, it inspired a sense of awe and excitement for Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza and elsewhere. It seems to me that we are inching closer to that common ground between all of us as Palestinians. I was very disappointed by the late reaction to what took place in Yarmouk. And I think in a way that late reaction was explained on the basis that we have been told for the last 20 years that Yarmouk is just not important anymore, that Ain al-Hilwa is not important anymore. It surprises me, it shocks me, because I'm someone who lived through these two generations. But if you think about it, how many of Palestine youth were born after Oslo? Or when they were little babies and children when Oslo was signed? They could not even relate anymore. But a new consciousness is building up. And Yarmouk is somehow finding itself being pushed into the center of the Palestinian discourse. Again, it takes time, but it's happening. It's happening slowly. We are transcending this mega narratives, the heroics of the Fatah and the heroics of the socialist groups. We are not worshipping individuals anymore. Mahmoud Abbas's popularity, I would say, really more or less, in a real competitive environment, more or less would end up being a margin of error. I mean, ultimately, we are moving beyond all of these symbols, the Abu this and the Abu that, and we are looking into the people. It was not individual, it was not these great heroes who fought for Gaza and were stuck in the tunnels fighting the Israelis. And they are not the ones who are rebuilding the homes. You know how they build homes in Gaza now? They are using sand to create bricks that builds homes. Their creativity and resourcefulness. They crush the destroyed cement of the buildings that have been destroyed by Israel, and they build even better buildings with it. And I know it's going to be many, many years before Gaza is rebuilt, but there's not a moment of pause. You see, so the fact that we are transcending all of that, and it's the individual, the Palestinian individual, who is now making the difference. I think ultimately it is going to be the Palestinian society that is going to articulate the new discourse. How will this happen? When will it happen? I don't know, but I know that there is a great deal of momentum. And this is why I insist that the solidarity movement cease from dictating to Palestinians what to do, how to fight, violent, not violent resistance. No, you've got to step down to our level, not to preach, but to work with us, hand in hand, in solidarity, until this nightmare is over and Palestine is back.
Yes, ma'am.
Of course, the logical conclusion of what you have said about the Palestinian division territorially, politically, Fatah, Hamas, and so on and so forth, A, B, and C. It's all I think, a very realistic diagnosis, but when it comes to what will happen, of course, we all, I can understand you can never give up, and the third intifada has been predicted I don't know how many times, and the only thing you can basically say is it will happen, it needs time, and so on and so forth. But the actual situation on the ground and the balance of forces also, of course, is very important. And beyond the Palestinian issue is, of course, the fact that the wider Arab world is in a complete crisis after the failure of the Arab Spring. And we now see this very strange but very important and significant alliances between Egypt, Israel, Saudi Arabia. They are the best friends in the world, which doesn't sound very good for the kind of new reordering that you wish for, and which, of course, eventually would end up in dissolving the Palestinian Authority and bringing back to the responsibility of the occupier. But at the same time, these new alliances on the Arab front, and still the very important relationship between the Israeli government and what you would call the Oslo structure, are powerful countervailing powers. So, how realistic it is to expect on, I mean, I hope still to live it through in my lifetime. So how realistic is that there will be this fundamental change beyond hope?
Right, I mean, let's remember that Oslo was justified at one point in the past as the most realistic, right? Abbas liked to use the word pragmatic now. These are the balances. Yes. But it's important that we understand that in the question of justice and injustice, we don't think based on balances of power. We think in terms of right and wrong. If someone mistreated me, no matter how powerful my opponent is, I am not going to give up or feel that I'm going to accept injustice for eternity simply because I am powerless or I am no match for that person. At a collective level, the same is true. So, if this is about realism, I think Palestinians would have given...
I would say it's about strategy.
Right.
Of course, I'd agree with it. But you have someone who translate this refusal to accept your injustice anytime, any day. You have someone to translate this in political strategy.
Absolutely. And that's the failure that I addressed and I spoke about. We definitely need an alternative Palestinian leadership. And when I say an alternative Palestinian leadership, I'm not talking about the structure per se. I mean, it could be the PLO, revamping the PLO, or any other, but the idea that we can't have the Palestinian struggle dominated by specific factions who have access to billions of dollars, factions who are affiliated with the very imperialist powers that created this mess in the first place. In my opinion, this is a more realistic way of accepting and acknowledging that this is going to be the proper path to getting to where we want to be, than continue to kind of, perpetuate this lie that what we've been taking place for the last 20 years of talking and more talking is actually going to get us anywhere. It will absolutely get us. So this is now the situation in the Arab world. Now, as I said earlier, now there is a shared Nakba. And there is something comforting about the fact that, we say when your misery is shared with many, it's less miserable. So now we are sharing our misery with so many. And now, again, once more, we are facing this reality that we have a common cause with our Arab brethren. We feel the pain of Syrians and Egyptians and Libyans and Yemenis, and we are hurt by what they are going through. And we watch TV and Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya and elsewhere with the same anticipation as if we are watching what's happening in Gaza, because we care that much. But I would not say that the Arab Spring has failed. I think if we assume that it has failed, perhaps our initial understanding of it was a failure, in the sense that for generations, the Arab world has been controlled by two dominant forces. The local ruler, the emir, the sheikh, the president, the leader, whomever, and his cronies, those who benefited, the ruling class, and neo-imperialist powers. They never let go of their gains and their influence in these regions. I mean, you go to the Gulf, you could tell this is really more or less a British-American influence region. This is not truly independent part of the world. These are not truly sovereign countries. It was really more or less a compromise between these two forces. The rest of us, the multitudes of hundreds of millions of people, basically subsisted as their fate is being determined by two dominant powers. If you toe the line, you're fine, you get everything you want. The palaces, everything. If you somehow decide to play according to your own rules, as Saddam Hussein once did, then you are going to be punished. And you are going to be punished severely. And your punishment has to be particularly severe to send a message to anyone else who dares break that golden rule that has existed in the Arab world since the Great Arab Revolution in the early 20th century. And the Arab Spring was the first time in the history of that relationship that the Arab people rose as a collective. They did. We have got to give them that. It's not about failure and success. It's about the people fighting for relevance in an equation that has been entirely determined by forces outside of their control. But when you have societies where you have high rate of illiteracy, no political empowerment, no functioning civil society, no functioning institutions, things fell apart, they imploded. They imploded. But the fact is, the idea is now there. There is the element of fear that existed in many of these societies does not exist anymore. Egypt is a very good example. Egyptians were stereotyped by themselves sometimes of being rather peaceable and, they accept anything. Yeah? Now look at Egypt now. Look at this generation in Egypt now. Every single day, you have numerous protests that go out in every village, in every town in Egypt, from Helwan in the north to Asyut in the south. This political consciousness, nobody tapped into that for many generations. We really thought that the Arabs were, I remember one time, my first political science class at the University of Washington in Seattle. My professor said something really offensive. And nobody challenged him on that. He said, in political science, we refer to the Arab world as a place with strong leaders and weak people. And everybody kind of took notes, and I was just so bothered by it. I couldn't challenge that. I mean, in a way, practically he's right. When was the last time we rose against anything? And nobody can say that now. Yes, there is a terrible situation, but you know what? This is the price that you would have to pay to gain your freedom, because freedom is absolutely precious. And this is not a sentimental value, it's a reality. Because to be free is to have access, economic access, political empowerment, share of the wealth, everything. And if I am the ruler and I control everything, I'm gonna fight you every step of the way to prevent you from getting to this platform and share access to everything. That's why there's war. And that's why it's gonna continue to be brutal. But I tell you that once that sandstorm settles, the new Middle East is going to look entirely different than the previous Middle East. And I think history has shown that this is in fact what's going on. When the people unite and decide as a collective, as a large group of people, they are determined to reach a new destination. No sheikh, no matter how strong, no dictator, no matter how fakely decorated with wars that never took place, no one is going to be strong enough to stop them.
Recently there were elections in Israel, which I think brought out both hope and horror. Hope in the election of the joint list headed by Ayman Odeh, and horror in the appointment of a justice minister who is specifically asking for Palestinians to be wiped off the map. I'd like to know your thoughts about these developments.
I think by now, you kind of got used to the idea that I try to stay positive, no matter what. And I tell you that there are reasons for optimism as a result of the Israeli election. I'll tell you. For many years, the Israelis have kind of provided this brand about themselves. The good cop, the bad cop, the doves and the hardliners. And the world just bought them. Somehow they did, despite the fact that the Labour Party, the Likud did not exist until the late 70s. Prior to that, it was the Labour Party that was responsible for the Nakba, the major wars that happened since then, and the ethnic cleansing and all of that. But that brand was really quite comforting for Western countries, the United States in particular, because everybody sits on the edge of his seat waiting for the doves somehow to win, and then if they do, then we are sold a few more years of yet more peace process, and then everything falls apart, then the right wing comes back, and so forth and so on. And I think the source of optimism is that two things. Number one, if you look at the Zionist bloc of Herzog, the language was very much similar to that of the Likud party of Netanyahu. Very, very much similar. Their stance on Iran is as hawkish, their stance on Palestinian Jerusalem, on Palestinian refugees, on the peace process, everything was as hawkish, but somehow they were a bit more amiable, easygoing in how they presented it. Very clever. It's really all about branding. Ultimately, they were the same. Yeah? And now that pretense that there's a new blood in the Israeli leadership. Come on, John Kerry, get back with your shuttle diplomacy, back to Jerusalem, bring them together, and let's talk peace. And if Mahmoud Abbas, tries to, fight a little bit, just for the show, perhaps, just give him a few $1 million, and if he fights a little bit harder, Israel maybe will withhold some tax money, and somehow they will arrange it. The Jordanians will help, the Egyptians will help. They will rearrange it, and once more, the discourse of peace is going to be back for another 2-3 years until another election, government collapses, and so forth. I'm glad that this did not really happen. I'm glad that this is the true face of Israel. And don't waste any more of our time, please, in the peace process. This is Israel. This is what Israel stands for. This is what Israel always stood for. This, I think, is essential. But the other source of optimism, just back to the first point, would mean that we can't now wait for the new savior from the dots anymore. We have got to face the reality that is going to be Netanyahu and Lieberman and these lovely gangs. Once more, they are going to be around, and you've got to do something about it. Western governments cannot run away from their responsibilities any longer. They've got to face up to the fact that we are inching closer to a greater and greater disaster. There will be another war on Gaza, there will be a worsening situation in the West Bank, and so forth and so on. So we need to do something about it now. It gives us a greater level of urgency. But the other thing is, it seems to me that this racist mentality that has been really gripping Israeli society, it's always been there, but sometimes it's kind of well-managed, hidden. But now, it's just not there. They are completely shameless about their racism toward the Palestinian population. The fact that they are, what we are doing right now is actually illegal in Israel. You could go to jail in Israel for talking about the Nakba. So there are laws that have been cleverly devised in order for them to criminalize the Nakba. They do it in clever ways. They would say, funding that comes to organizations that would commemorate the Nakba is considered illegal, money laundering, whatever it is. It's actually illegal, not just for Arabs and Palestinians, but also for Israeli Jews, progressive leftists. They can't do that anymore. Israel, it's that much of a suffocating, undemocratic society they have become. But also the Arab parties in Israel that have been divided for many years are now realizing that this is not politics as usual anymore, that they are targeted as communities, that their very identity as Arabs are being destroyed and diminished. And they also understand that if they did not unify, even at least as out of complete necessity, that this is it. They will no longer be able to register as a relevant political unit in Israel anymore. And they needed that. And they did. And I was talking to Ilan Habe recently, and I said, do you think this is temporary? Do you think that eventually, he said, this time around is different. It's not coming out of political necessity anymore. There is really this solid feeling within the Arab community, not the political parties, by the way. The political parties are reacting, again, when I was talking about the individual, the society itself is fed up. It's fed up by those who are promoting, communist slogans alone, and the Islamist slogans alone, and the secular. They understand that ultimately they are targeted as Arab communities. And all of these ideological and political facades, ultimately they are irrelevant. And that's why they unified, and that's why this time is quite serious. And that's another important component of optimism. Now the fight is on. We are dealing with a Zionist, racist, right-wing Israeli government. And on the other hand, we are dealing with a Palestinian collective that is now enjoying a great deal of political consciousness, and it's building up slowly in Palestine, in Israel, and outside of it.
Jan?
I'm Michal Shotai. I want to, if you don't mind, to answer me. I was always wondering why there is not popular support for Marwan Baroud.
Why is there no popular support?
Yeah.
I actually think that there is a lot of now. When we say Marwan Baroud, just for those who don't know, Marwan Baroud is one of the leaders of the first Palestinian Intifada, 1987. He kind of gained his credibility within the Palestinian community because he was a grassroots activist, spent years in Israeli jails, and now he is back in Israeli jails, and he's been there for years. And I think there is a lot of credibility and support for Marwan Baroud as a representative, as a Palestinian leader, not necessarily as a faction member or a member of a faction, but as a Palestinian leader, and also as someone who is part of one of the greatest real causes for the Palestinian people, and these are the prisoners. The prisoners really is kind of that living conscience of Palestine. They are the resistors, they are the fighters, they are the people, the intellectuals, the poets. These are the people who took a stance, and they are being punished as a result of it. And that is just really, it pains every Palestinian everywhere. Every single Saturday, I believe, women in Gaza go with the posters of their imprisoned children. They go to the Red Cross Society building, and they just sit there. Demanding the release of their children. There's this, it's just really part of internalized as part of the Palestinian experience. And Marwan Baroud has earned, through his struggle, through his time in jail, he has earned a great deal of credibility as a Palestinian prisoner, as a leader, as someone who has been quite articulate and quite strong and uncompromising in terms of the rightful demands of his people. But also, don't forget that there is the other dimension to that story, that Marwan Baroud comes from the faction Fatah. And Fatah has been kind of going through, to put it mildly, I would say, soul-searching for years, especially since the death of Yasser Arafat, where you have these kind of two types of leadership within Fatah. You have Yasser Arafat's generation, Mahmoud Abbas, Korea, and others, and you have the new generation, the younger people. So you have the old guard, and you have those who were really developed their affiliation with Fatah, spending times in Israeli jails, in the West Bank, during the Intifada, in Gaza. And I don't think that conflict has really been settled. And I think until Fatah, which is really, they were perhaps the first to usher a more nationalistic Palestinian narrative before anybody else, before Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the socialists. It was really Fatah that kind of took revolution to the street. And it's extremely sad to see what has happened under Oslo to this revolutionary group. But there's a lot of soul searching that is taking place, or should rather take place within Fatah. And because Marwan Baroud is affiliated with that group, it becomes rather, I don't want to say it tainted him, but it kind of makes it rather difficult for Marwan to become a unifying figure outside the factional divides. I mean, think of Hanan Ashrawi, for example. How fantastic, how articulate. But because of her affiliation with the Palestinian Authority and her affiliation with Fatah, it also became rather difficult for her now to become a unifying figure. And I think that is really an issue that, that is just something that we are used to by now. And some had to make the choices that they did. You have Mustafa Barghouti, on the other hand, who was not involved directly in any particular faction. And I think people like him, I think their reputation and their legacy somehow perpetuated, carried on for much longer as rather figures that are quite unifying. Might not have captured as much the popular imagination of Palestinians, but still quite unifying. So I think factionalism had a lot to do with Marwan Barghouti separately, or Ismail Haniyeh, or whomever, were not unifying figures at a Palestinian collective level, as opposed to at a factional level.
Do you think that Mustafa Barghouti still has a great political future for him?
Mustafa was in... no,
weren't you talking about Mustafa Barghouti?
No, about
Marwan Barghouti.
Who is in Israeli jail. Now, Mustafa, first I must acknowledge that Mustafa is one of the... is a very noble person, did a lot of work, especially grassroots work, his involvement in the international solidarity movement, speaking the right language, reaching out the medical services that he provided for Palestinian villages and refugee camps. I mean, we are talking about someone who is really put his money where his mouth is, as opposed to people who kind of spoke from podiums and did not really go down to the level.
One of the architects of Palestinian civil society.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I also think that perhaps it is time for a new generation in Palestine. Not to discount from the moral authority of people like Mustafa Barghouti, but I do think that there ought to be a new Palestinian generation that is able to kind of lead the rest of us really into a new direction. And I think Mustafa recently in London, I'm not saying things on his behalf. He was, I think his daughter is now quite a famous lawyer, and he said, it's my daughter's generation who's going to lead the way. So I think he is a great figure and a unifying figure, but I also have hope in the youth of Palestine to really kind of take us to the next stage of our struggle.
Okay, then well, I think that we've come to the end of this rather informative gathering. So this is it. I thank you all for being here. Dank u wel voor uw aanwezigheid. Thank you.